Hello everybody. My goal at this channel is to share my experiences keeping cherry shrimp with the world to help people in their shrimp keeping journeys. The topic I want to share in this video today is the best way to filter our shrimp tanks. As with many aspects of this hobby, there are definitely more than one right way to do things. So keep in mind, I am sharing with you what I have found to work the best for me. I do have over 1,000 gallons now dedicated to keeping cherry or neocaridina shrimp. Been at it for 5 years, and so you could say I've picked up a thing or two along the way. Again, remember, there are certainly more ways to do this than what I will show and talk about in this video. These are just the ways that have worked the best for me over the years. First, we'll start out with the easiest and most basic of ways that I filter my tanks, and then we'll gradually move on to the more complicated filter setups that I have. Many of my filter setups are DIY, but don't let that scare you away. Almost all my filter setups, even the DIY ones, can be set up with store-bought products, even if DIYing isn't your thing. Something you will find in common with all of my filters and almost any shrimp filter is that they use sponges. Also keep in mind that even if a filter doesn't go by the name of a sponge filter, almost all of them incorporate foam of some kind, with maybe the exception of undergravel filters, and many of those have some kind of foam product incorporated in them somewhere. For example, a matin filter is not called a sponge filter, but it still uses a sponge, just not in the traditional sense of it being a circle of foam, but instead of sheet of foam. Another thing all shrimp filters have in common is that they move water either through the power of air or through the use of a water pump. Both ways move water through media, which, like we stated before, is usually in the form of some kind of foam. This is my foam of choice. It is what is traditionally thought of as a typical sponge filter. These are purchased as sponge filter replacements with the name brand ATI. These are the Pro Model Size 5 sponges, which is the reticulated type of sponge. These sponges are more coarse and tough. They allow for better flow and last much longer than the cheaper sponges under the same brand and size, which are finer, clog up faster, and don't last as long. But the non-pro versions are much cheaper. I find that the pro version is well worth the extra money. So now that we are essentially moving water through sponges, let's take a look at the different ways I accomplish this in my tanks. When most people think of sponge filters, this is what they generally think of, and that is the air-powered sponge filter. These can take many different forms, but generally consist of a tube with holes or grooves that allow water to pass through. Those holes are then covered with the sponge, with some kind of airline tube going down the middle of the filter tube. The air makes bubbles, which displaces the water and causes the water to flow up and out of the tube. The displaced water is then replaced by water that flows back into the tube through the sponge. So as long as there's a supply of air displacing the water, the sponge is not completely clogged, you get a constant movement of water passing through the sponge. Many people think that these are only good for biological filtration because there is not much flow. But anyone who's cleaned out a really gunked up, well-used sponge filter can tell you just how much crap and debris gets trapped into these filters. Not only are they providing biological and mechanical filtration, the air bubbles are also breaking the surface of the water, therefore oxygenating the water, and that is a huge factor. Nothing will cool off a tank quicker than lack of oxygen, and it is for that reason in most of my tanks where the filter is powered by a pump, I still like to have some kind of airstone going just in case the pump malfunctions. There are many benefits to using air-powered sponges. 1. There is no moving parts other than the air pump. This means less chances of something breaking. All you need is an air line running to the tube, to the tank. You don't have to have power cords and all that. I mean, most tanks do, but it'll be one less power cord you gotta worry about. All you gotta worry about is an air line. With the bigger air pumps, you can power many tanks with just one pump, so this makes it the most economical way of filtering a tank. Next we have the pump-powered sponge filters. This is the next type of filter I use on my medium to large tanks. It is essentially the same setup as the air-powered sponge, but instead of using air from an air pump to move water through sponge media, I am using water pumps. I like to do this in my bigger tanks for greater flow. In many of the tanks I have set up like this, I use a 3/4 inch Schedule 40 PVC pipe with holes drilled into the pipe to allow water to flow through the sponge into the pipe, and the water in the pipe is then pumped out by the pump, causing flow through the sponge. In bigger tanks, the extra flow you get, I find, is good at doing a better job on the mechanical side of filtration. I prefer to have slow, soft currents flowing through my shrimp tanks to keep piles of mulm from forming. The easy, slow flow current keeps particulate matter in the tank suspended so that the sponge and pump can clear it out. It keeps it from settling on the bottom. It is important to keep a closer eye on the pump-powered sponge filter setups because the sponges can and will get clogged up much faster than the sponge filters running just on air. Another concern with these setups is that if the pump fails, then your filter is not going to work. It is for that reason with all these pump-powered setups that I have going, I like to always run an air stone. The shrimp will be okay for a while with no flow, but if you have lots and lots of shrimp in a tank like I do, in all my tanks, the lack of air will kill them fast. This is less of a problem in tanks that are sparsely populated, but if you have a whole bunches of shrimp in your tank, then I think you definitely need some kind of air stone running in case the pump fails or your sponges get clogged unexpectedly. I have learned my lesson the hard way. I've come home after being out of town for work a couple times to either one of these situations happening, and I've had some noticeable shrimp die-offs because of it. After the second time it happened, I started running air stones in all my tanks that use the pump-powered sponges. The last couple kinds of sponge filters I use, I'll call them pump-powered sponges plus and pump-powered sponge filters plus plus. They use sponge filters, but will also have other means of filtration besides just a sponge. I use these type of filters mostly on my bigger tanks, although I do have 5 20-gallon tanks that use this type of filter. Most of the ways I have this type of filter set up is using the traditional hang-on back filters with a big sponge on the intake. That means you're getting water sucked up through the sponge as the first form of filtration, and then you have filter media in the actual hang-on back filter. In my 75-gallon shrimp tanks, I like to use 2 of the bigger sized hang-on backs, like the AquaClear 110s and the biggest sized Aqueon hang-on backs. Now this is the pump-powered sponge filter plus plus. Now this is what I call my guppy pond. It is essentially a pump-powered sponge filter on steroids. It is in my 110-gallon guppy pond stock tank. While the main inhabitants are the 1,000+ guppies, there are also hundreds and hundreds of shrimp in here, along with a colony of 50+ bristlenose plecos. The filtration demands are extremely high in this setup. It is an entirely DIY setup. It is powered by a 1,000-gallon per hour pump. The water comes in through 3 sponge filters and goes to the pump. The pump then pumps the water through a 5-gallon bucket that is full of lava rock that lava rock acts as an excellent biomedia. Then at the top of the bucket there is a layer of pea gravel that is used to grow plants hydroponically. Right now I'm growing a huge variety of Anubias immersed. So this filter incorporates 3 sponge filters, a 5-gallon bucket full of lava rock as biomedia, and a vegetation filter to suck up all the nitrates that all these critters living in here make. But essentially, it is still just a sponge filter that is supercharged. In closing, I again want to point out that this is how I filter my setups, and how I have found success breeding so many shrimp. One of the big things trending right now is going filterless with maybe just an air stone. Some don't even use an air stone. That way it can be done, but it really cannot be done in my setups. I am breeding thousands and thousands of shrimp, I am dumping lots and lots of food into my tanks, and I need the filtration, movement, and air to make it all happen. I've had pumps fail on me before, and if not caught soon, bad things start to happen. If having a tank that is sparsely populated is okay, and you're just going after a planted tank with a handful of inhabitants, then you may very well be just finding no filter or air. Remember, sponges come in many forms, whether it is the traditional round sponge filter, a sheet of foam on a matten filter, or even the foam and a hang-on back. It is all still a sponge filter in my book. Another thing to keep in mind, if you're using a pump to move water, you always need to have some kind of protection on your intake to keep the shrimp from being sucked into the pump. Whether it be a sponge or some kind of stainless steel sieve. You have to protect those shrimp from being chopped up in the pump. But we don't want shrimp getting sucked up in the pump. So this is how I have found success in my shrimp tanks filtration setups. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and maybe and hopefully you learned something. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.